rewatch movies I love, like, I'll find new things I love about them, and I love this movie, but I didn't necessarily find anything new that I loved about it. I think part of that is the simplicity of it. It's very short, it's very simple plot-wise. You're not gonna get a lot of nuance with a bunch of non-actors. I still like it, but I hate to say this, I don't like it as much after this rewatching. What did you think of it?
I mean, I like the movie. I was never a gigantic fan of it. I think this is probably the third time I've seen it in my life. It's enjoyable, and like you said, it's quick. It's like an hour and 2 minutes, or hour and 4 minutes, and it's over just like that. It's kind of a build up to the end there, but yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good movie, but I've seen it probably around the same amount of times you have, but I kind of held it up there really high. And after rewatching it again, I started questioning why did I hold this up so high? Like it's good, but it's not great like some film scholars try to make it out to be. Um, because one certain things I asked myself while watching it, and I'll ask you as well. Do you think this film would be as highly regarded today if Tod Browning used regular actors, people born without deformities, instead of the circus freaks or people born with deformities that he did?
No, I don't think so at all. I think that was part of the, for lack of a better word, charm of the movie, was that he was using real people who had these real afflictions, and it was a world that a lot of people didn't know even existed, probably, and to a lot of extent doesn't exist at all today. So, um, yeah, I don't think it would have had the same impact whatsoever. I mean, there have been aspects of it, like if you ever seen American Horror Story, they actually had some of the similar characters and things, but obviously they're they're not real. They're just actors portraying people who you see in this movie. So, yeah, and it just doesn't have the same impact, in my opinion.
Yeah. And another thing I ask myself is with movies like these that are very old and that may have been controversial at the time of their release, they tend to get edited down. And then because this was a long time ago and they were made on film and film deteriorates and people don't use didn't back then think that they would these movies would be around so long, is they're always like these deleted scenes, the original cut, like there's so much of an aura built up about things like that. And with this film, there's a lot built up about how much darker the ending was and the fact that the movie was 90 minutes instead of an hour.
Right.
And there were a lot of scenes that were not just cut out, but like additional scenes were rewritten to make it less offensive, I guess would be the term. Um, but do you? This is one thing I thought about. With mainly non-actors in the cast, would an extra 30 minutes of people who don't know how to act really be that much better than what we're seeing? Like a nice, tight, concise 60-minute film?
I guess we'll never know. I am very curious as to what those missing 30 minutes entailed. I know there's a few things online that said some of the stuff that in there, but considering that you had non-actors in a role, maybe an hour and 4 minutes is enough.
Yeah, yeah. So those were the two main. Those are the main things that like kind of like I was thinking about while watching this. Is I'm like, this works as an hour. I don't know if like watching it, these non-actors stare at the camera like looking like a deer in headlights for
Hmm.
an extra 30 minutes would have actually added more. I think like just seeing him use actual freaks and seeing like these people have real deformities, that's enough. Just a few minutes on screen it's enough, you know. Um, and I know I'm sounding negative, but I did enjoy it. I did like it a lot. It's funny how much beauty standards have changed.
She was once a beautiful woman. A royal prince shot himself for love of her.
Not to insult the actress playing Cleopatra, but she gets built up so much.
She's the most beautiful big woman I have ever seen.
And I'm expecting like Marilyn Monroe, Pamela Anderson, Margot Robbie, and instead we get soccer mom. That was a little
I
bit hard.
I thought she was okay, but yeah, nothing overly special. To go back to what you were talking about before, to me, one of the most fascinating aspects of the film is just looking at those people. I mean, that they're fascinating to visualize, to see. You don't see people like that in the real world. I'm sure there are some out there still, but to have them all in one place and pretty much almost acting somewhat normal, doing their normal activities, they're just, they were called freaks, obviously, but they were people too, you know.
I think part of it is that as technologies progress, I think women and couples can know if their baby is going to be born with a
Correct.
deformity and they can choose to not have it.
Correct. Yeah, and some of those things that they've weeded out too. Yeah, so you're absolutely correct. Yes.
Yeah. I think this has come up before in a previous review we did, but you mentioned you listened to Howard Stern.
Yeah, and you're thinking of Beetlejuice. Is that where you're going?
I'm going with Beetlejuice, Hank the Angry Drunken Dwarf, and
Hmm.
Eric the midget, or Eric the actor, as he would like to be known.
Eric was my favorite.
Yeah, yeah. It just like when I watch this, it reminds me of them because even in this movie and the way people kind of like react to people like this in real life is to treat them like kids or like pets.
These children are in my circus.
Children.
What
Yeah.
Howard did was he almost like Tod Browning did is like, no, these are real people. Stop treating them like, they're not, it's okay to be mad at someone because just because they have a deformity doesn't mean they can't be an a-hole or something. And
Yeah.
watching this kind of reminded me of those whack packers.
It's the whack pack. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, they get horny, they get perverted. They're just normal people who in abnormal bodies, and yeah, that just kind of reminded me of this. And
If Howard Stern was around in the early 30s, I'm sure some of those people would have been on his show.
oh yeah, without question, without question. Um, yeah. So, what did you think of the ending? Not to just skip right there, but we talked about some of the footage being gone. Uh, I'm sure you've read similar stuff that I have online that the muscle man, which again, standards have changed for what muscle men can be.
Hmm.
I mean, this guy's maybe he's a decent shape, maybe he's a tough guy.
Well, here's something for your eye.
Far from a muscle guy. But supposedly, one of the rumor things that the alternate ending had was he was castrated, and it was implied because he was singing soprano at the end of the movie or something like
Oh, I actually didn't read that part. From what I read, was probably what you read also, is that they made it a happier ending by having that couple get together, which, by the way, you probably know this, that couple was actually brother sister in real life, so they had to be careful, not make it too risque. But yeah, I enjoyed the happy ending. It seemed to sum it up fine with me.
that.
I had no
Yeah,
issue with it.
yeah. Falsetto, not soprano. I'm not.
Okay,
I'm not
yeah,
good
there you
with
go.
music. Yeah,
Yeah,
but yeah, I don't know. I thought the ending was good. I thought it was really creepy when they were crawling under the
yes.
stage. That was. Whew.
Absolutely. That's from the first time I saw this movie back in the late 80s. That's the one scene that stood out to me. The one thing I remembered over the years was just those crawling little people with their knives and lack of legs, and it was creepy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's a scary image in any era, So
Yep.
I like that aspect of it. I think it would have been more interesting if it was a little bit darker with the castration, because from what I've read, it was only implied when he was singing um, falsetto. But otherwise, like yeah, the ending is fine. The happy ending, it's okay. Usually, you would think that during that era they'd be forced to have an happy ending, but this was pre Hayes Code era, so they could have,
Couple years. Yeah.
yeah, they
But
could have had a
what
darker ending.
to go back to that creepy scene with everybody crawling under the stagecoaches and whatever else. The interesting aspect about that, yes, it's creepy seeing these, killer creatures coming, but they were actually the good guys. You rooted for them. They were going
Yeah,
after the bad guys.
yeah, yeah. And it was actually based on a short story that was in a magazine called
Right.
Spurs, and it was more they were more so the bad guys in Spurs than they're portrayed as quote unquote the good guys. This is I think it's kind of shades of gray as to who's good and who's bad in this. Yeah, the yeah, Hercules and Cleopatra are kind of the bad guys, but did the punishments fit the crime?
Well, I
Should they have
mean,
been
you
killed?
probably not. No, I mean that seemed a little extreme. All there were some hurt feelings. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like she was poisoning him, but she didn't actually kill him, and
correct.
all it really did was make him sick. It's not necessarily like he was dying. He was just a
Right.
little bit sick and under the weather. So I don't know if she was necessarily doing a great job of trying to poison him. So I don't know. But yeah, it was a little bit shades of gray. And I read up on what the original story was. It was kind of silly, but I and it plays into one of the other major scenes aside from crawling under the stagecoach was the wedding dinner scene. Um, I, I, Again, that's a scene that to me is still it's
Yeah.
still memorable today with the
Yeah.
Google Gobble one of us and
That's the other scene that little rephrase has been stuck in my head for
We
years.
accept a one of us. We accept a one of us.
Gooba gobble, gooba gobble.
We accept her. We accept her. Google gobble. Google gobble. One of us. One of us. Google gobble.
Yeah, that doesn't
yeah,
go away either.
it's part of the zeitgeist of our culture now. You know that whole
Yep.
scene. If people who don't even watch the movie or are aware of the movie are probably like they know
One
that
of us.
particular scene. Yeah, one of us. What was interesting in this rewatching was I didn't even notice the ending part of the scene as much as I did in previous viewings, and I thought that was even more cruel when Hercules um, put Hans on Cleo's shoulders and she started dancing
Right.
around with him. That is
Hmm.
incredibly demeaning.
Yes, it is. Yep.
Yeah, and that was a major part of the short story. Was that um, the Hans character in the short story was like, oh, she got drunk and she said like I could run around France with you on my shoulders, and then I guess that was the dark ending in that was that
Hmm.
he held the sword to her and make her run around France with him on his shoulders, which is kind of silly, um, but yeah, I felt that scene was pretty dark in this rewatching of it. Um, but yeah, otherwise a pretty simple story. Not a lot of characters stuck out to me. There was the one actress that played Venus, and she was in Island of Lost Souls, I think this year or the year
Was
after.
was she? No, I'm thinking of something else. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, I thought she was pretty good. Did any of the other actors stand out to you in particular?
Well, uh, the one who always stands out to me is, for weird reasons, is Schlitzie, the one who the guy was saying, "I'm going to go to France and get you a big hat." She was one of the what they called pinheads back then. The only reason I'm familiar, actually, it was an actor who played Schlitzie, who was a woman in that. And the reason it stands out to me is because there's a website I follow called Find a Death, which talks about how actors died and stuff and shows pictures and graveyards and thing. They actually raised some money to get a grave marker for Schlitzie, who apparently died in the early 70s. Actually, I don't know exactly what that affliction is called that he had, but yeah, for just seeing that character always stands out to me, just for the unique look and because I know a little history of him now.
So that website just tracks dead people or something?
It's called Find a Death, and it's a guy in LA who actually takes people on tours. It's called Graveline Tours, where he shows people, like where John Belushi died, where the Manson murders took place. It's kind of like a ghoulish death trip, basically. And his website is dedicated to, the last few days that somebody experienced their last death. He has some death photos on there too. It's a celebrity thing. It's all celebrity deaths. So it's a fascinating website, and they sometimes do things like raise money for gravestones for people who don't have them. So
Interesting.
and
Interesting.
an interesting character of Schlitzie to go get a gravestone for.
Yeah, because that's another debate with this film is like, how do you view it? A lot of people say it's a horror movie. Some people say it's exploitation because they're exploiting the quote unquote freaks. How do you, what genre wise, how do you view this film?
Oh, it's hard to pigeonhole this one. I guess it's even kind of a drama. I wouldn't really call it horror unless you think people who look like this, those quote unquote freaks, are horrible. They're just regular people who were pushed and got revenge. Maybe you can consider it horror. I don't know. Exploitation, I think absolutely, because I think that's what the director was going for, to get an audience by showing people that you don't usually see. So, but I'm sure they got paid whatever they needed to get paid at the time. But yeah, there's some definite exploitation aspects for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny you were talking about Shitzy as well. Is that a lot of, like, I read up on what happened to some of these actors and or freaks because they didn't really do a lot of acting necessarily, but a lot of them disappeared shortly after this, died shortly after this, or died broke or quietly. Not a lot of people really made much money off of the
No,
movie or were able to
and
capitalize on it in any way.
most of them disowned the film too. I think I read, with the exception of the Johnny, who was he was the legless man who just walked on his hands. He apparently was always proud of the film, but most of the other people disowned it. So
Yeah, it's hard to gauge like how people reacted to them after the film, because obviously the way we're reacting to it now is not the way people in the 30s reacted to it. It's pretty interesting. There was only one plot hole that I found kind of hard to overlook, is that Hans was supposedly filthy rich. Why is he a
yeah.
circus freak if he's filthy rich?
Boy, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. You'd think he wouldn't need that, but yeah, interesting. Unless it fulfilled him somehow, maybe. I don't know.
I don't know how running around being called a freak in a circus and being made fun of and working for peanuts is
Yeah,
fulfilling in any kind of a way. I just thought it was
yeah,
interesting because that's not a critique. Like, a lot of people praise this movie and that's not a critique or even something that's even brought up in any of the reviews I've read for it, which is kind of interesting.
right.
Yeah. But this, along with Dracula, was registered with the Library of Congress for being culturally historical and significant. Um, and these were both, obviously Tod Browning films.
Right.
What do you think of him as a filmmaker and this film and Dracula and how they fit into his filmography?
I'm actually not familiar with anything else he's done other than Dracula, which I watched a few months ago as well. Um, I think he did a good job, in both those films. They're very unique films. They're very highly praised. Um, yeah, did he do anything else that was? Apparently, he didn't. There was a backlash to this film, so he did something called Devil Doll a few years later, which actually I think I have seen that one, but it seemed like his career never really recovered from this, from what I read.
Yeah, supposedly like this hampered his career, but who knows? Because it was a transition period in the 30s, early 30s, from silence to talking pictures, and there was so much changeover in actors and filmmakers and writers and the way films were made. Like, who really knows? Like, he didn't really have a lot of hits. He did like a lot of like workman type films in the 20s, just like, like factory output type movies, because you didn't have TV. They just made a ton of like, generic movies. I don't, you didn't hear of his other films because they probably weren't particularly good. So,
Could be. Yep.
Yeah. As far as the 1931 version of Dracula, where do you put it in the echelon of Dracula movies? I'm not the biggest fan of it. I know it's pretty famous because of Bela Lugosi, but it's not my top Dracula movie.
Well, I enjoyed it. To me, it's about the atmosphere. I do like Bela Lugosi because I saw the movie Ed Wood, which portrayed him. So it's kind of, I always have that in the back of my mind when I'm watching anything that he's in. But I do like the atmosphere of that movie, and it's just there's a certain creepiness to it. Although I must say I like the 1922 movie Nosferatu more than the 1931 Dracula.
Yeah, same here, same here. And I like the Hammer Dracula films as well. So,
Sure.
and Candyman, I consider that a horror Dracula movie as well in certain ways.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, I mean, not a lot to say about this movie. It's fairly short. The plot is fairly simple. It's not incredibly nuanced. It is a great film. Um, you know, no matter how high or low you put it, it is. I do think it's a significant film that people should watch if they haven't seen already. Any
Yeah.
other final thoughts on the movie?
I would definitely say check it out. I know it's available on DVD. It's probably available on Blu-ray also at this point.
Mhm.
It's just a fascinating film, in my opinion. That's one of those films that you should just see. If you're a film fan, this is one that should be on your list at some point. You don't need
Yeah.
to watch it over and over again, but watch it at least once because it's a fascinating cinema.